guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Roxy. Today's project, I'll be recycling the tints, that head paint which I used to paint my house. I didn't throw away the tints, so I'll be recycling them into a beautiful Ottoman bench. If you're interested in seeing how I'll make this beautiful Ottoman bench using these tints or the small buckets for the paint, kindly keep on watching. First, I started by getting rid of the bucket handles so as to make it easier to use the buckets, and then went ahead to remove the lids of the bucket so as to help in arranging the buckets into the shape that I need for the Ottoman. After arranging the buckets, I went ahead and made some holes onto the bucket so as to put in the zip tie easily. The zip tie will help in holding the buckets together so as to make it easier to work with them while they are together. I would have used hot glue on this part, but the hot glue was not holding well onto this plastic, so I had to use a zip tie to hold my buckets together. After holding the buckets together, I went ahead and overturned them on the upside down. So I'd be using the bottom part, whereby I had to place a plywood on the bottom part of the buckets. The measurements of the plywood is equivalent to the measurements of the width and the length of the buckets held together. Once it was done, I went ahead and made some pivot holes onto the plywood. And then I added 1.5 inch screws to hold the bucket and the plywood together. I had to put more screws on the bottom part of the bucket so as to make sure it's held well onto the plywood. After that, I went ahead and took the measurements of my plywood. I had to divide the plywood into two, that is the length of the plywood. Then took my board to make the lines. After that, I had to make some other lines on the sides of the plywood using the middle line that I had made on the plywood. By doing this will help me on making the pattern of the tufting onto the plywood. To make my bench more steady, I had to add some pieces of wood onto the two buckets on the left and also on the right. The measurement of the pieces of the wood that I use for this part, it measures 4 inch by 4 inch. After making sure the wood are well placed into the buckets, I went ahead and added some screws which will hold the plywood, the wood and also the buckets together. So I had to add some long screws which will hold well the plywood, the bucket and the wood. After placing the wood, I went ahead to make the patterns that I'll use for tufting. Kindly, I'll put the measurements that I used for the tufting, but it depends with the height or the length of the wood that you're using. After making the markings, I went ahead to make my diamond patterns, which will help me to make the holes which I'll be using in my tufting. First pattern that I had made were a bit bigger, so I had to make a smaller ones. That's why you're seeing there are more patterns on one board. So I had to make the diamond tufting more smaller compared to the first pattern. After making the pattern, I went ahead to make some holes onto the plywood. This whereby I'll be passing through my needle as I make my tufting of the bench. Sorry guys, I noticed I didn't record the video of placing the foam onto the plywood, but I used this contact glue to stick the foam onto the plywood. I also added some more glue on top of the plywood and added another foam which is smaller than the first foam. I went ahead to make the holes which will guide me on where to pass through the needle. So the holes which I made on the plywood guided me on making the holes on the foam. After making the holes, I went ahead to add my batting foam onto the Ottoman bench. Guys, I had to add another foam the same size as the first one so as to make my Ottoman bench more thick. That's why you see the size has changed compared to the first size that I had shown you before. After placing my batting foam, I went ahead to make the holes again so as to make it easier to see the holes while passing the needle through. I then went ahead to place the fabric that I'll be using to make my Ottoman bench. I chose this color, which is Velvet Royal Blue, to make my bench. For tufting, I had to use the staple gun, a thread, and also some buttons which are already fixed in a thread. I'll be using this to make the tufting on my Ottoman bench. For those who are new to my channel, it's so great to have you here guys today. Thank you so much for clicking onto this video. My name is Roxy Nimis. I normally do some DIYs or home decor DIYs which are inexpensive, and if you really love my videos, please don't forget to click on the subscribe button and also on the notification bell so as to get notified whenever I post new videos. And to my returning subscribers, all I can say it's thank you so much guys for your love and support. Keep on supporting Roxy Nimis by sharing her videos with your friends and family. Thank you so much. You can also use the staple gun only to make the tufting instead of using the needle to make the tufting, but I prefer using the needle so as to make sure my tufting looks well, and also the good thing about the needle helps you to make sure your tufting it's more deeper compared to the pins, and also through the needle you can control your pattern well or the shape of the tufting, unlike using the staple gun. After tufting the top part, I went ahead to fix the sides of my Ottoman bucket. As you can see, I had to use my staple gun also to hold the fabric well and to make sure the pattern is seen well on the sides. So I had to use pin to secure my fabric well, and after cutting the excess fabric, I had to add more pins to make sure my fabric is well secured on the bench. Cut the excess strings on the bottom part of the Ottoman, then overturned it and placed my plywood on the bottom part of my Ottoman. After placing the plywood, I went ahead to make some pivot holes which I'll use to put in the screws onto the lower part or the bottom part of the Ottoman bench. I then added some screws to hold my plywood well on the bottom part of the Ottoman bench. Sides of my Ottoman bench, I had to cover it using some cardboards. I had to place the cardboards to fit well onto the opening part, then used my staple gun to hold the cardboard well on the sides of the Ottoman bench. Then went ahead to add some contact glue on the cardboard so as to place my 1/2 inch foam on the side of the Ottoman bench. After that, I went ahead to place the fabric on the side of the Ottoman bench. Kindly check where I placed the fabric. I had to look to the place where the plywood is so as to make it easier to staple down the fabric onto the side of the Ottoman bench. I had to hold my fabric well using a lot of pins on these parts, and I had to staple down the pins closely together on a straight line so as to make sure the edges looks well when I overturn the fabric. I then overturned my fabric. As you can see, the edges have turned out so well. After overturning my fabric, I had to staple it down onto the plywood. After stapling the excess fabric onto the plywood, I didn't want to cut the excess, so I just had to staple the whole of it onto the bottom part of the Ottoman. I had to add these legs. The contact of where I got these legs I'll put in the description box. I didn't get them in gold since I wanted gold, but I got them in silver and they look so pretty. After placing my legs using hot glue, I went ahead and added some screws so as to make sure the legs are well held together, or are held well on the under part or the bottom part of the Ottoman. Once I was done, I went ahead to add some gemstones onto my tufting. Even though the tufting was a bit deeper, I just had to add some gemstone to cover the buttons that I had used earlier. Onto the sides, I had to cover the joint using some sunflower mesh. I'll put the contact on where you can get this sunflower mesh in my description box. I had to use hot glue to hold my mesh well onto the joint of the Ottoman. And finally guys, this is the end look of the beautiful Ottoman that I have just made using some recycled paint cans. You can't say it's made of paint cans guys. I just love how it has turned out. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this beautiful recycle project. I made this video just to show you how you can recycle some items instead of throwing them away. For those who are new to this channel, please don't forget to subscribe and also click on the notification bell so as to get notified whenever I post a new video. Kindly go check at the end screen of my video, a video whereby I transformed a plastic chair into a beautiful accent chair. Don't forget to subscribe. There's a subscribe button at the end screen also. Bye bye, see you next time for a new video.